Wine Tech Insiders Podcast, episode 11. We're going to talk today about the evolution of the marketing of wine. And as always, it's a pleasure to be joined by our insiders, Jonathan from Bottlebooks.
Hello.
Seb from Troly.
Good morning.
And Laurie from Oushinery.
Hi, everyone.
And so we're going to talk about how wine marketing has evolved, where it is today, where it's going. Let's start off with a little historical perspective. You're a producer 20 years ago. What do you do? What do you do to market your wine? Where were we 20 years ago in terms of wine marketing? Seb, maybe I'll start with you on this one.
20 years ago, I officially was not allowed to drink wine. I was a baby, so I don't know. No, in all seriousness, we definitely were a number of years ago, and that's what we're trying to get out of. We were in a position where wine was very much marketed through distribution and wholesaler, and you would effectively have a fairly traditional a sales rep, right, trying to promote the wine, trying to bring it to different events, trying to get it into different restaurants, and the concept of direct sales. Look, I would put forward that direct sales started probably about 10, 15-ish years ago. The US has always been a bit in front on that trend. Australia's followed really well. But we were in a very human relationship driven mode, I would say, 20 years ago.
And Laurie, what were people doing before Oushinery? What were they doing for bottle images? And
so Oushinery is 4 going on 5 years old, and so 20 years ago, not unlike Seb, I was also like really young, but being from France, like I was already allowed to drink, like nobody ever checked. But like when it comes like to imagery, I think, like since like the longest time it was more like the traditional approach. I think it was much less prominent to already have an image of every single SKU, just like it had like less channel of distribution for that image, right? Like there was like no internet, no like, so there was like less usage out of it. And it was obviously like traditional photography. It's really fun to look back at some of the more like stylized lifestyle images of the time, because it's just so, retro looking. It's fascinating. Maybe you look at like wine photography or even like food photography, like through time, we always feel like, oh, but like it's the same like roast, but the same roast in the 70s would be photographed very differently than the roast today than it would be in 20 years or something like that, or even 10 years. There's a lot of fashion going on that way. But I would say like not a ton of imagery when it comes to wineries. And as Seb mentioned, just like the idea of like marketing was much more distant. Like in a way, didn't feel like it was on the shoulders of the producer, but it was like in-betweeners that would take care of it.
And Jonathan, what was happening with the B2B side with trade events and importers and distributors, and how did that all work 20 years ago?
Again, I wasn't as much into wine 20 years ago as I am today. But
you were legally allowed to drink, right?
Just I was legally allowed to drink. Yes. But I mean, if you look at the village events 20 years ago, that was when Pro Wine was a tiny regional event. London Wine Fair was the wine stage for the world when it came to the big shows, and that was when you were still building a London Wine Fair double-story pavilions, 2-story pavilions, which you still see at Vinexpo. But it was interesting is that some of the key players that are still there today were also there, and the main players 20 years ago, which is interesting. And also on the distribution side, I'm speaking now from Kansas on this one, and growing up here, I'm not certain what you would even market around wine, because the 3-tier system I think was even stronger back then. So I'm not even certain how you knew or what you were buying, because you can't buy at the grocery store here. You have to go to liquor stores. And then the selection would have been controlled by the wholesaler for the state. So how much room there would be for marketing other than just buying what you have on the shelf. And then Germany, like when it comes to product information, what always caught me, I thought was really interesting in Germany was you go to a German wine event and all the wineries show up with 14, 15, 16 wines, which is a huge number of wines when you compare it to other wine regions. And what somebody explained to me was that historically there was this really strong relationship between a consumer and their winemaker. You didn't buy wines from different winemaker, you bought from a single winemaker, which meant that that winemaker needed to make the full range of wines that his customers or her customers would like to drink. And that's why, or one of the contributing factors why in Germany, so many winemakers, they don't just make one or two wines, but they make 10, 12, 14, 16 wines to cover everything from your sparkling to your whites, to your rosés, to your reds, to your desserts. And they make it all. Which is interesting. And of course, now people are drinking much more eclectically and are looking for the product information, looking for the imagery, looking for the stories, as they have long ago started to branch out past their family's winemaker.
Yeah.
And Seb, how old is Troly?
Yeah, me. I'm 23 years old. Are you saying I look old? What do you mean? I mean, that's just rude, right?
So
if we put it into context, go for it.
2 years ago, Trolley's been running. It's sort of been fairly new to the scene, and you suddenly have amassed this state of customers. Where was the state of selling 2 years ago before this kind of pandemic hit? Where were we in terms of selling wine?
Look, ultimately, if we just take a quick step back, I think, 20 years ago, the internet was present, but the wine industry was not, and even e-commerce was not super prevalent. And in the last, say 5 to 10 years, consumers have now started really buying online. And so 2 years ago, when Trolley came about, we effectively had a few pieces of software helping wineries with their e-commerce, helping small businesses try and sell in a direct kind of a fashion. It's clear that increasingly consumers are now seeking or demanding a more direct relationship with the brands, right? And so the broad spectrum marketing that we used to do 10 to 20 years ago, where a single brand was being pushed through television and through different things, that is no longer the case, right? So we're now really starting to push online and direct marketing. As I was saying, look, 2 years ago, we had a few different software which were really old, which were really sort of fitting together, but not really helping in a modern kind of a world. And Trolley effectively came to be for that exact same reason. We wanted to try and give the industry a very tailored tool in order to really do a very high amount of high personalization style marketing. That's a long answer to a short question. Sorry.
And Laurie, where were people 2 years ago with their images? Had you gotten a lot of adoption? Were people really moving to having great images? What was your take?
So like for us, like what we have seen 2-3 years ago, so pre-pandemic, like really like a shift. I want to say still like early adopters. I think the shift into like having the owners on winery to be the one marketing and promoting their wine maybe happened a bit more like 5 years ago. And it's something that the industry has, not everyone has embraced it. Like something, oh, the liquid should speak for itself, but that's, you know, as we know, like it's not enough. But some like wineries really like stepped it up really and just be like, okay, like there is now marketing is a role within the winery, and sometimes it's even more than just one position because you have everything when it comes to social media and so on, like community management, but there's also like marketing, everything that's like email. And it's just like, so it's just like really interesting to see that even like position roles, even in smaller wineries, kind of like got built. And sometimes it's not like a full-time position, but it's still like a proper hat that is, like, oh, I'm doing marketing now. So that maybe happened probably like 5 years ago. And then in the last, like, so 3 years ago, what we saw was Oushinery. We were just like, couple of like 1 year old or something, and just really like seeing like the early adopters embracing not just marketing but like a new way of doing marketing, something a bit more freeing, something leveraging more technology. So as you know, Oushinery does not use standard camera. Like we don't use product photography, we use 3D technology, so we do it all digitally, and it's just kind of like this excitement of like, oh, like there's more possibility and option when it comes to marketing. And it's been really fun to see like those early adopters really like jump in. And then just before the pandemic, we're really already like ramping up, like maybe, I don't want to say like more conservative brands or wineries, not that, but maybe more like set in their ways slightly, that were inquiring about our services. It's just like ramping up their own marketing, and then the pandemic hit. So I know we'll talk about that in a bit, but like it was just, we were on the cusp already, and then the shift to online and the need for even more marketing, relevant, authentic marketing showed up.
And Jonathan, you're talking about Povine, and what was Povine like 2 years ago, and maybe also dive into a little bit about what product data was like and the situation was a few years ago.
Looking 2 years ago, it's to some extent you almost have to look through what has changed in the meantime to really recognize what was happening or describe it 2 years ago. And I think if I were to do that, I would say one analogy for how things worked 2 years ago was it was a shotgun approach. You'd get in a room and you would hope that the largest number of people are there and the largest percentage of them would be buyers. And then you would just sort of hope that you would bounce into somebody who wanted to buy your wine. And that was basically the way that events did the math. And when you're in that and you've been doing that for years, you don't really necessarily see that's what's happening, I think, until you go through the pandemic and you suddenly are not using your shotgun anymore, but you're having to pull out your scalpels, and you're having to be a lot more precise about what you do, and your techniques are also improving over that time as well. But I think, going back, I'm not certain that there was I think there were always people who were interested in the details and the stories behind the wines, but I'm not certain that there was a critical mass of them to break through sort of the shotgun approach mentality. But that said, it's these larger events were what everybody wanted to go to, and so people associated value with them, even if it was a shotgun approach.
Go ahead.
I was going to say I think it's fair to say that 2 years in the world of wine is nothing. It's probably worth looking a bit further back, but ultimately things in the wine industry is a bit more traditional than a lot of industries, so they do tend to move a little bit slower. And there's also the advent of the internet. I think we need to keep in mind that consumers never really used to have tools to look up wineries, tools to discuss amongst hundreds of thousands of people a wine that they had last week. And we're seeing not only in the world of wine, so the whole direct to producer kind of approach, the whole relationship that consumers want to have with the producer today. This is not just in the wine world, right? This is in the coffee world. This is in the craft brewery world. This is in a number of different verticals. And this is a trend which I believe is not going to slow down, right? Yeah. Ultimately, the impersonal products that were marketed broadly 20 years ago are not exactly appealing to consumers today.
I think like what changed, maybe like shifted. It's just like 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, like wine had much more I'm oversimplifying here, but like a function, like literally it's a product that you bring to the table to enjoy with friends or with a meal. Like it was not necessarily, unless we're taking fine wine and everything, like it was not necessarily like, much more than that. Like it's just like you could enjoy the wine, you could comment about the wine, but that was this. I think now like a quote from Gladiator come to mind, so bear with me, but like, are you not entertained? Like this is like this idea of like wine is also this vehicle. It's like the sweet spot of a product. It's not a pack of cereal, but it's not like a fancy Louis Vuitton bag either. And it's like a product that's a vehicle to much more of a story. So yes, it can be a story about the vineyard and the winemaker, and some consumer will be attracted to this and we want to know more. Sometimes it's entertained because the label or the story, or like there was a problem making the wine and it's being celebrated on the label and being embraced. It's like, oops, oopsie daisy, like, but still, and try it, it's great. And then then in retrospect, then like the consumer can then entertain their own party when you bring that bottle to the table. Like, it's just like very interesting how, to me, like wine, I'm not saying that the liquid, and I'm talking more like, a bit more like bigger market or even like small wineries for that matter. Like, it's just much more of a vehicle for entertainment. It doesn't have to be like funny, but it has to be more like a part, like it needs to be relevant and bring something to the consumer. And even like when you go, 19 Crimes, like even before they did like the VR and like augmented reality, so AR and everything, like it's the story of like, this, like, right, Australia's history is just like bringing prisoners from the UK and just like they colonized. And it's just like, that's a story. And maybe like when I bring that bottle to the table, I can tell that story to my friends because maybe they didn't know about it. And like, it's just like much more storytelling driven. And sometimes the story is not always about just a vineyard. Like, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Are you not entertained? Mm-hmm. Go, Mr. Crow.
From
Go.
Gladiator, you do realize I was like 2 years old when that movie came out.
You are not that young.
What else? So today, what are successful? What's working today to market, to sell wine? We're in a pandemic. We're kind of maybe getting out of it. And it's shifted some things. And there's issues around that, there are topics around that pandemic. There are things that maybe it just accelerated. Where are we now? What are the successful wineries doing? Maybe Seb, will go to you on this. What are the winners, your clients who are really doing well?
Look, it's fascinating just to look at the premise of that a bit more broadly. The pandemic definitely accelerated the adoption of technology in the world of wine. For sure, right? We have wineries who started using our platform who told us, look, we're selling everything through my local restaurant, and they lost 100% of their sale overnight, so they had to adapt, right? Now, we also need to consider that not only are our wineries now aware that technology is required in order to sell wine, we also have a pretty significant segment of the population who was required or forced more or less to at least try buying online and are now comfortable saying, oh yeah, click, buy, and it just shows up. Wow, right? So before the pandemic, this was very much of the newer generation, the convenience of just buying on the fly, whereas now you have my 70-year-old parents who bought groceries online and they're like, this is magical. You don't have to wait in line. It just shows up. This is great. So I think the pandemic definitely changed the consumer habits from that perspective. And now the challenge that we're having is that every single wine is more or less available online in some way, shape, or form. And now from a marketing and a sales perspective, wineries really need to try and push and go through different channels in order to reach consumers, right? So we used to lean on the tasting room. We used to lean on the solid door sales for people to come in and visit. Now, this has kind of been affected a little bit, but it's not a COVID problem. We've had the tasting room problem for 20 odd years, right? We're the only industry where if you don't go and visit the winery, you will not discover their wines. Yeah. So now the whole idea is that in order to find new consumers, the most successful wineries have been using proper Facebook advertising and LinkedIn advertising and Google ads even in order to try and differentiate their products. And the key here is as we all know, here's a $19 Pinot, here's a $20 Pinot. The both of them have got a dark glass and a crown cap. Which one do you want?
Mm-hmm.
It's next to impossible, and this is where, I think, from a marketing standpoint, the 19 Grimes, and you're now seeing. Look, I saw recently a bottle out of South Africa where you could pull like a little pull tab on the at the top of the bottle, reading the story of the winery behind it. This is just the little things that will make consumers interested versus an equivalent product, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also do think that the way that marketing is shaping up moving forward, especially as the new generations, you're now looking at the millennials and the Gen Z, they are the bigger consumers of wine by dollar, right? Mm-hmm. Even though they buy a bit less per capita, they buy more by dollar because there's a lot of them. And these guys demand a very direct relationship. So you can no longer just lean on what we used to do, which was email marketing, right? Mm-hmm. Newsletters every quarter, right? Oh, I'm just announcing my wines. This no longer works, right? Mm-hmm. Consumers really want to be addressed by their name, and they want to feel like they have a direct connection. And from a technology standpoint, this is really hard for a small 2 to 6, 10 people business who, with no marketing or technology know-how, it's really hard for them to do that at scale, right? Mm-hmm. I can send a one-on-one text message to a customer to say, thank you for your online sale. Fine. If I've got 10 sales, 20 sales, 50 sales, that's a bit of a different endeavor. So consumers now want to buy online. They want a relationship with the winery, and the wineries now absolutely need to find ways of differentiating themselves. The website is not enough, right? Website is just the door to start selling, but you need to start pushing into different publications, different channels, in order for the wine and the word of mouth and the stories to be discussed. Mm-hmm. Another long answer to a short question.
And also to encourage this relationship to keep going. Like I find it's sometimes so much missed opportunities as well. And I know there's some technology barrier, I'm not, but even you were mentioning the tasting room issue, people go all the way to this tasting room, taste the wine, enjoy the wine, buy the wine, and then at no point would the winery collect proper information about it. It's just oh my goodness, it's just this is it's always easier to sell again to somebody that already had a great experience, right? You have this relationship with and it's just that kind of missed opportunity. So that happened from tasting room to direct sale, but that happened sometimes from direct sale to direct sale. A person that I've purchased once, they may have loved your wine, but if a new brand or something new, and a winery around does better marketing and is more present in social feed or just online, then your wine that they actually loved in the first place, they may just, I hate to say it, but forget about you. It's just sometimes it's just because there's no shortage of wine out there. It's just I still do a bit of wine design, wine labels on the side, and it's just it's always oh, you have a new brand, so that means we have to kind of elbow out another one already out there. The shelves are full, right? It's not so it's just interesting to me. Sometimes marketing is just looking at it a bit more how to connect the dots. And I think there's so much missed opportunity. Again, there's a technology issue, but sometimes it's just more the putting that hat on, having that mindset of
Jonathan,
and again, just
Jonathan,
no.
It hasn't gone for 2 years. What are restaurants shut down? What about marketing to B2B? What are successful wineries doing now, and what do you think will really last beyond this kind of perhaps sort of temporary state of lockdowns and COVID and restrictions that we're in?
I would kind of to answer that, I'd probably divide the wineries into those that are more focused on D2C and those that are distributing through a network. I think looking at the ones that are D2C, I think that's, Seb and Laurie have talked a lot about just the developing your customer list. And on the B2B side, I think that's where not having the major events has also had a huge impact on the old way of doing things. And what I think we've seen is very interesting in that the associations have been the ones that this year have stepped into the void that the large events have left and filled it. They're the ones who have been like many of the digital initiatives of the last 6 or 9 months have been pioneered by the associations. And if you had looked like 2 or 3 years ago, that might have surprised you, because the role of the association was about organizing physical events, getting pavilions organized at the large events. And then in the last 12 to 18 months, they have really enhanced, many of them had really enhanced their role in supporting their members into starting to accompany them on their digital journey. And I think that's really been interesting to see how many associations have been taking the risks and initiative on digital projects, whereas many of the events, with exception to like the London Wine Fair, the associations are really moving things forward on the B2B side.
Seb, you were saying that the wine industry moves quite slowly. If you're building a brand, starting something today, and you're thinking, okay, what is marketing going to be like in 10, 20 years? Where is everything going? What would you advise somebody? What would you tell? What are real trends? What are real things that will be sticky? What's going to really matter in the future?
Look, ultimately, it's a combination of 2 factors, I believe. That level of personalization, right? It needs to be pushed on. Laurie mentioned collecting data, and I remember a Silicon Valley Bank wine report a couple of years ago who were basically saying the same thing, right? If someone buys your wine, they obviously like it. You need to sell to them again, right? And collecting email addresses, connecting information, and that we're no longer talking about tasting room, right? Collecting details online, right? So asking for or offering some sort of an incentive for collecting data for anyone who's discovered your wine is going to be important. So ultimately, that level of personalization, recognizing a customer, because I think increasingly as consumers discover a product, I mean, I can speak for myself. First reaction is, okay, let's jump online, let's check them out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm discovering
Absolutely.
a new bottle, and there's a few reviews on Vivino. Great. There's that nice little seal wax on the bottle. Great. My first reaction is, okay, let's check them out. What did they do? Who are they? Right. And so that will be crazy important in order to differentiate a product. Right, you want to have a bit of something special in the bottle. You want to have something special in the presentation, in the format, in the branding. Something needs to sort of come out. And then if I look it up, I need to be able to connect with that winery. And connecting is not necessarily through a website, right? So we're talking about Twitter, we're talking about LinkedIn, and LinkedIn not so much, but Facebook, Instagram. Look, even some wineries are on TikTok. Right, doing some winemaking kind of videos on TikTok. And the key here is that I have, as a consumer, I have discovered a product through a great dinner at a friend of mine, through an awesome wine tasting at a restaurant, through visiting, or through an uncle who just came for dinner and brought a bottle, right? And so I've discovered a product. And on Friday night, when I just feel like some wine and, my shelf is empty, like most customers who don't really store wine at home, I need to just have a notification that Twitter, oh, the winery that I discovered 2 weeks ago has just posted something. Oh yeah, I want some wine. Let's just go and buy some wine. And that's the idea, right? The technique of selling the product. So I think the numbers is 8 touch points before a customer buys the product. So once they've discovered your product, they need to see your brand 8 times, your name coming up 8 times. So it's not necessarily a blunt, Friday afternoon promotion, buy. It's any kind of a post that's happening at the winery, any sort of information about the story, any sort of pieces of details about the product, right? Oh, we won a medal. Okay, great. Oh, I'm having this wine with this food. Even better, right? Lifestyle kind of stories. So consumers need to be able to connect, and that's the challenge. Wineries or the wine industry is more of a traditional kind of approach, and it's our responsibility to make technology available for them to do that without having to understand how does Facebook work, how does Twitter work, how does TikTok work, how does Snapchat work, right? It's too much for them. They are really good at making the wine. They are really good at crafting a product that's completely unique and complex. But we cannot ask them to just blindly go, oh yeah, I'll click and just do my marketing is done today. It's not how it works.
Yeah. And you bring on a good point, Seb. It's also like just how findable, and I'm not even talking like findable as in like ready to purchase your product is, but how findable in most likely Google. I mean, some people use Bing. I don't know who those people are, but
3%.
Like but sometimes it's just like, okay, put yourself, like in incognito mode, or even better if you put like even a VPN, so you pretend to be elsewhere, and search your own product and see what comes up. And if your own website is not showing up, it's just it's just sometimes like fascinating. And I think there's like, like there's this transparency, this communication that like the newer customer, like the younger customers like want to have. And there's nothing more bigger than a red flag than Googling a wine and having no return, or return that are out of left field that are totally not related. Like it's just like, I don't know about this. Like it doesn't look legit. Again, I'm not saying is it fair, not fair. Like that's the reality. Like it's like now I'm in a wine store and it's just like, ask Siri, like just like, can you return me some result on that wine? Literally, like I have my AirPod. I just say, hey Siri, like what about this Cap Sauv? And I read and. It pulls up results. And when like the first 3 results, that's what Siri only shows up on your phone, none of them are related to the wine. I'm like, hey Siri, next wine. Like, like it's just, I can't even be bothered. And it's just like fascinating. Sometimes like I think wineries just like putting in the shoes of the consumer, like this empathy that I know I keep mentioning, like, but it makes the marketing much more genuine as well. I think if you come from that standpoint, rather than like you say, shotgun, like let's just bombard, sell, buy. Like it's not working as well. So just
okay, It's interesting. We've done so we have Troly is connected with a number of different channels to help wineries push their product, and we've actually observed. We've done a couple of tests, completely off topic, but we've done a few tests as to what kind of website traffic and e-commerce traffic increase do we get if the product is present in 5 new channels, right? And we're talking something like even as simple as Wine Searcher, which is an old, I'm going to get fucking smacked. But the fact that we're capable of automatically pushing the product information into different channels, that has a direct correlation with the amount of visitors onto the winery's website, right? And that's the idea, I think, from a technology standpoint. Even Wine Searcher, you can't really expect a winery to log on there and upload their latest vintage on there. So Laurie, from a marketing standpoint, I think we need to figure out how is Troly and our Oushinery going to automate that marketing onto all of the social channels automatically with the greatest images across the most channels.
Yeah. And removing away some of this, like as you mentioned, the busyness, right? Like it's just like it's very easy to just be busy doing one-on-one and everything, but that just I mean, like it just doesn't work as well. It's not scalable.
It's not scalable. Yeah, 100%. And look, the one question, I just want to go back onto the B2B really quickly. I'm just conscious of time. And I'm curious to hear, so we're talking about consumer trends, consumers having a direct relationships with wineries, consumers discovering a product through friends and family and then trying to reach to the winery or trying to buy the product again. How do we feel about restaurant sales and retail sales in the world where there's probably going to be a lesser amount of business travel, right? How is a retail bottle shop going to differentiate themselves with their offering if they don't already know a winery?
Jonathan?
Jonathan is unmuting.
I'm trying to understand what you're asking.
I'm kind of thinking pre-pandemic. We basically had sales rep pushing, going to restaurants, going to retail store, and distributors, importers trying to more or less slug the product. We're now in a position, it's now been, 12, 18, it's probably going to be 24 months before restaurant owners or wine importers are allowed to start traveling and start discovering new wines again. Right? And will they, or how are they going to increasingly discover different products to import other than doing the consumer search on Google? Right? How is a restaurant going to find a product that their next door neighbor doesn't have to put on their wine list?
Well, I think that's interesting that it might actually depend a bit on the country and what's happening in that market. So I think if you are one of these businesses in the UK, you have a range of options because you have a lot of rebottling going on, a lot of master classes, tastings, seated tastings. So there's seems to be, you might not be able to travel to the wineries as easily, but the wines are being brought to you, and you're not even having to leave your house. And this was in a market that, pre-pandemic, you could go to in London, you could go to a trade tasting every day of the year if you wanted to. But now it's being delivered to you at home. Other markets you're not able to. It could be more difficult in other markets where I don't know if the rules have changed in the US recently, because I know that things were evolving, but as recently as 5 months ago, you were not able to do rebottled samples in the US. You could, if you're living in Washington, DC, you could exploit some sort of a gray loophole and do some rebottling in Washington, DC, and then ship it across the US. But you just don't have that range of options if you're a restaurant in the US to get that wine, to get that variety of wine delivered to you in a consumable manner. So I think it's you might have different markets recovering or adapting to the new, or hopefully not the new normal, but like at least the way things are going to be for the next year or 2 years. It could be a bit more,
and even beyond that, right? I think we all agree the B2B channel is not going to go away, right? There's always going to be restaurant sales for wineries for sure. The question is really, as technology is moving forward, as sommeliers are coming of a new generation of sommeliers, these guys might not want to go to a trade tasting anymore. I'm curious as to how we're going to help the product or the B2B channels discover those new products in a new sort of a technologically driven way in the future. Maybe that's going to be it for our next podcast.
But I think you make a good point there, and I think the trends were already happening before COVID. But for other reasons, primarily because of the industry starting to take the environmental costs of travel and logistics and everything more seriously. It was flying everybody all around the world for the different events that had an environmental cost to it. And I think there were some steps being taken to put more focus on different regional tastings and now that has happened just because you're not allowed to travel. But like COVID really kind of accelerated, different reason, but same result that we might have seen in 2019, but pre-COVID, that might have been peak physical event. And now it's just going to be more diversified. People are able to do a lot with digital events. And so the physical events will still remain important, but it's not the only, it's not the
only avenue.
It's not the only avenue. It's not the only party in town.
Well,
interesting.
Great. Laurie, any last thoughts?
Oh, I think Seb and Jonathan kind of like sum it up like nicely. Like I'm personally, I know I'm enthusiastic by nature, but I'm really excited by what's coming up. I think there's just more like possibility and creativity when it comes to marketing. And yeah, I think it's not that we're just getting started, but we're getting started like bigger. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Wine Insiders. This has been the Wine Tech Podcast, episode 11. Thank you, Laurie from Oushinery, Jonathan from Bottlebooks, and Seb from Troly. We will see you all in a few weeks.
Nice one.
Thanks,
See you
bye,
later, guys.
everyone.
Cheers.
Bye,
Good seeing you.